in this section that we've been looking in the book of Mark, and it's a beautiful section. In this section that we're going to look at today, though, we're going to cover quite a few verses, but I know you can handle it. You'll be fine. But in this chapter that we're going to look at, the first half, we're on our way to the cross. Really, the whole gospel account is on the way to the cross. And Mark, the writer of this letter, there's 4 gospel accounts. Many of you know that. Maybe you didn't. Mark wrote his first. Or I should say, it seems that Mark was the first of the writers, which makes his account really interesting, what he highlights, what he focuses on. And Mark chapter 14 is a long chapter, and if you're looking down and you're kind of looking at it and you're gauging time, don't worry. 72 verses will be done in 3 hours. It'll be great. So, just kidding. Now, we're gonna cover quite a bit, but we're going to focus on, there's kind of an idea that I want you to see here. It's an interesting chapter because, I was reading it over and over throughout the week, and it's a discouraging chapter. When you look at it from Jesus' perspective and the life that he lived, he came to reach us with no ill will. He never wanted anything but our best. He loves us. He became one of us so that he could connect to us. And then he's going to go to a cross. And this chapter is particularly heartbreaking. And the word that I want us to connect with is I want us to see the heartache of Jesus, not at the cross, but even before the cross. And the reason that's going to be important is because of a verse that I want you to look at. And if you don't have to turn there, but I'm going to read it to you from John chapter 13. In John chapter 13, in the first verse, we read about when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Now, just for context, that's about the same time roundabout as Mark 14. It's all about in the same general time period. And this verse, for me, helps frame an understanding of what Jesus not only experienced, but how he saw the events of Mark 14. So let me read to you from John 13, verse 1. It says this: Before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And that's that phrase that I want to focus on today, and I'm going to reference it several times here, and it's this, that he loved them to the end. And we're about to see his end. It's coming very soon here on earth. But he loved the people that were his. He loved them to the very end. And as we read this chapter, that phrase is going to become relevant to us. Because if you were in Jesus' shoes, if I were in Jesus' shoes, I can guarantee you I'd have a hard time loving them to the end. There's a few times along the way I'd have loved to drop them off because of the heartache that Jesus must have experienced. And when Mark wrote this letter, he particularly wanted to connect you and I to this ministry of Jesus, that he was the servant, that he came to serve us. And Jesus said those words, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life. And so Jesus came to serve us, and yet in the process, there's these incredible heartaches that he must have experienced that would have easily swayed you and I from our mission, very easily. I don't know about you, but we're Christians, right? We want to serve, and we want to serve until somebody treats us bad. I want to serve until somebody treats me like a servant. Isn't that the worst? How dare you treat me like a servant? Oh, wait, that was what I was going for, right? And Jesus is treated terribly, not by the world, not by the enemies, but even by his own disciples. And that's the hardest part of this chapter. The heartache that Jesus experienced came from his own people. So we're going to pick up in chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. After 2 days, it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and scribes sought how they might take him by trickery, and put him to death. But they said, let's not do it during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. Being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. She broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves. And they said, "Why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they criticized her sharply. This woman understood what all of Jesus' disciples should have, and that was this: he was about to die. All the disciples should have understood that. Jesus had been talking about it for many, many days. He was very clear that this was going to happen, and yet everybody seemed to miss it. And this woman comes to Jesus while he's with friends in the town of Bethany, just on the other side of Jerusalem. And she brings this expensive oil and she pours it out on him. And she did this as an act of worship to prepare him for the very thing that he's been talking about, death. She took oil that was used to prepare a body for burial. And she pours this out on Jesus, and it's her act of worship. She's saying, "I have heard what you're saying. I hear you, I understand what you're saying, and I've come to honor you for what you're about to do. I'm going to recognize the gift that you're about to give us by dying on the cross before you have died on the cross." And of all the people in his life, of all the friends, of all the people who were dearest to him, she's the only one. She's the only one who understood what Jesus had been saying this entire time. And so she comes and she's ready and she pours out this incredible gift. And she's criticized right away. She's criticized that you've wasted that oil on Jesus. Now, when I say it like that, it sounds like a terrible thing to say. But that's in essence what they said. You wasted this oil on Jesus. It could have been used for so many other purposes, for so many other reasons. Can you imagine? I mean, just try to put yourself... I think sometimes we read Bible stories and then we disassociate from it, so it's hard to understand the idea. Imagine if it's your birthday and one of your friends gets you an extravagant gift, and the rest of your friends start mocking that person for buying you such an extravagant gift. It'd make you feel kind of terrible. Geesh, I thought it was a really nice thing that person did. Just because you didn't doesn't mean you have to mock the one that did. You know, why would anybody mock someone who shows extravagance? I mean, there can only be a few reasons. It's got, part of it is just that feeling of, I should have done that. I should have thought of that. I feel bad because my gift is lame compared to that gift. And yet here's Jesus, and he's receiving this incredible gift of extravagance from this lady, from this woman, who's recognizing what's about to happen in his life. And the people that are the closest to Jesus, his friends, the very same ones, in essence, that are going to carry the gospel to the ends of the earth, we're told, and they're led by Judas, which is, whenever you're led by Judas, there's going to be a problem at the end of the story. They're led by Judas, and they all are kind of moved. It says that the disciples, or many of them, were moved by this idea that this gift was a waste. And here's what I want to say about this, because I think it must have hurt Jesus deeply. Here's the point that I want to make to you and me. It's this. It's when our charity masks selfishness. When our charity masks selfishness. What does that mean? Let me explain. The reason they were against her extravagance was what they tell us is because the money could have been used to feed the poor. In John's letter, John is the last person to write a gospel account, and John gives us context for what was really being said. You see, some were saying, listen, that money could have been used to feed the poor. And then we find out by John telling us years later, he says this, Judas is the one who had the idea, and Judas said it because he's a thief. It's very clear. I mean, read it in John's account. There's no wondering what John meant there. Judas was a thief. You don't have to read. There's no reading into that sentence. It's clear. Judas was a crook, and he wanted the money. And so he masked his selfishness with charity. We could have done something good. We could have used this to bless so many people, but instead, you kind of blew it on Jesus. And imagine how much that must have hurt the heart of Jesus. That the disciples that he chose are more concerned about themselves in this moment than they are about being extravagant towards him. You see, make no mistake, what this woman did was an extravagant act of worship. This was not like a half hand raised during a worship song, okay? This is full-blown, she's fanatical in this moment. The people the very closest to Jesus didn't even think to be that extravagant. She's gone really far. But unfortunately, the reason I said that there's a masking of selfishness with charity, and we have to look for what is the Bible saying then, and how does that apply to me today? I want you to try to put yourself in that scenario or in that situation. You see, the idea is this. We could have used that money and we could have fed more people. And by doing that, that would have been a wiser use of the money. But the reason they really did it was because, well, Judas just wanted access to more money. Could they have solved a big problem there in the city of Bethany or in Jerusalem with the giving of this money? No, it wasn't enough to solve the problem. It could have fed more people, that's true. But in the perspective of that large group of people, it wasn't that much. It wasn't that big of a deal. And here's the point that I kind of want to challenge you and I on is this. Without us feeling a sense of condemnation or a sense of, but is it possible that we can mask our own selfishness with little bones of charity that we'll throw here and there? That's what's happening here. Oh, we could do good with that. And rather than be extravagant towards Jesus, we can be wise and give a little bit to this thing, give a little bit to that thing. Jesus is looking for extravagance. In fact, at the end of this story, Jesus is going to say, leave this woman alone because wherever this story is told, she will be remembered for this. And by the way, here we are, 2018, talking about it. Proof Jesus was right. Here we are talking about the selfishness that consumed Jesus' disciples. The people that he has been pouring into are being swayed by a crook in their midst. And when a woman comes and offers this incredible gift of extravagance to Jesus, the rest of them miss it. The rest of them are more concerned about the wisdom behind it than they are the extravagance of love being expressed towards Jesus. It's possible that our acts of charity mask a deeper selfishness because it keeps us from extravagance. But God meant for you and I to receive extravagantly and to give with that same expression. Jesus is not loving you and me with drops, but with an ocean of love. It's an overwhelming amount. And how does he want us to love others? In the same way. Jesus loved with a self-abandonment. You will never be alone. I will never forsake you. I will be with you to the end. He loved them to the end. How does he want you to love? How does he want you to give? How does he want you to see the world, to show others what God's love looks like? The same way. Extravagantly. As we've received, we're supposed to give. The guys, led by Judas, wanted to give crumbs. Jesus wants them to give the full meal. They wanted to give little bits. Jesus wanted them to go for it all the way. Here's the problem, and I wrote it up like this. The problem was twofold. There was two problems here. Number one, they wanted to withhold from Jesus. The disciples, it's not that they just wanted to give to the poor. They wanted to withhold from Jesus. Jesus was receiving something extravagant, and they wanted to withhold. But secondly, they wanted to appease their conscience by offering something small. They weren't offering something big. They were offering something small. It's ugly when we mask selfishness with charity. And I imagine there's Jesus, and he's literally about to go to the cross. He's about to make the ultimate sacrifice, and his disciples are still holding back. They're still afraid to really give of themselves and to love without any reservations at all. What does it mean to be a Christian? It means that I have been loved without limit. I've been loved by God with no limitations on his love. Once this happens, if you do none of those things, we've just been poured out love. And so then how am I to love? I'm to love in the same way. I'm to love others. I'm to love God in the same way, with a total abandonment. The takeaway is this. Here's our little takeaway from this section that I think is important. Be extravagant with Jesus, love selflessly, and give generously. This woman is remembered for every generation because she gave generously, not just to a cause or to an issue, but she gave it to the Lord. She gave extravagantly. I'm not talking just the oil that she gave or the money she gave. I'm talking about the big picture of just she was extravagant. And God loves extravagance because he's extravagant like that. Look at the next section of this. Verse 6, Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why are you troubling her? She's done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do them good. But me, you do not have always. She has done what she could. She's come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you," verse 9, "wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." Jesus makes a statement here that I believe has been misquoted many times. And it's the phrase this: "The poor you will have with you always." Jesus said it, but it's been misquoted, too many times. So here's what Jesus is not saying. Jesus is not saying there will always be poor people, so give or don't give, it doesn't matter, they'll always be there. Okay? That's how it's interpreted a lot of times. The poor you will have with me always. Jesus isn't saying it like that. Secondly, Jesus is not saying there will always be poor people, so do good if you wish. He's not making this optional because there's always going to be poor people around you. Here's what Jesus is saying, and this is important. Jesus is saying, I am here right now. I am here right now in the flesh, and this woman is preparing me for my burial. I'm about to go to the cross. I will be beaten. I will be spit on. I will be scourged. They will lay me down, and they will drive nails through my arms and my legs on a cross. I'm about to die. And the entire time that all those things happen to me, I'm going to smell like this fragrant oil. You see, on the day here in Bethany, Mark 14, Jesus was covered in this fragrant oil. What do you think that room must have smelled like? It smelled like a Bath and Body Works, store. Who are the essential oil people in this room? You essential oiler, you oily people. I have friends that when they walk near me, I can smell peppermint. They're coming to me. I can smell the oils. Can you imagine how much fragrance would have been coming off of Jesus from all that oil being poured out on him? And so when he's arrested, he smells like oil. And then it was blood mixed with oil, and spit and oil, and wood, and the rust from a nail, and oil. The whole time that Jesus is going through what he's going through, what this woman has done for him is still there. And Jesus is saying, why would you take this from her right now? I hear what you're saying. Jesus knew Judas is a crook, so that's already established. It sounded good to everybody else. Hey, let's feed the poor. Jesus isn't saying, no, you're always going to have poor people. Don't worry about them. That's not his heart at all. But what he is saying is, I'm here right now, and this is the last chance you're going to get. And until I am in that tomb, I'm going to smell like the extravagance of this woman's offering right now. And while everybody else was worried about feeding certain people, this woman expressed a kind of love that would carry Jesus through the hell of the cross. And you imagine, even if you just keep walking through, and there he is on the cross, and he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the Bible tells us that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, and he despised the shame. And we know that when he was being crucified, that just the ability to breathe becomes more difficult and more difficult. It's getting harder and harder. And at some point, I'm sure he wasn't able to breathe even from his nose anymore. But until he could have smelled that fragrance. Until he wasn't able until the only way to gasp for air was through his mouth. Until that moment, he still smelt the fragrance. What comfort Jesus must have gotten when there was really very little comfort to be had. Knowing that someone out there knew what was coming and loved him extravagantly. And Jesus said, in that day, she's going to be remembered when this story is told. What happens for us, and I don't want to belabor this point too much, but what happens is what happened to the disciples and it happens to all of us. It's, Jesus says, the poor you will have with you always, and we misquote that to mean, well, there's not much we can do about that. And we just moved from a city, an inner city, filled with people that are homeless. But we also live in a city of San Diego that's filled with people that are homeless or on the very verge. And this is not my opportunity to crusade for you to do more, to feel bad, or to be condemned that you're not doing enough. I'm not interested in doing that. I've been here 7 weeks. I don't know what the real story is. But I do know this. I do know that our children have a different response to homelessness than we have as a response to homelessness. Have you noticed that? How affected kids are when they see that? It hurts. What's wrong? Why is that happening? And I wonder if that's not one of the reasons that Jesus says to you and I that we need to receive him like a little child. How we see, listen, we can love God, we can worship God, we can sing our songs, but if we don't love others, then we don't love God. That's what the Bible says. You get that, right? That the essence of the gospel is that it spills out in how we treat other people. The challenge for you and I, and like I said, this is not my crusade for some new thing that needs to happen and all, but Jesus said this. He said, in the last days, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was naked and cold, you covered me. And there were those who said, Lord, when did I ever do that? And Jesus said, when you did it to the least of them, you did this to me. So I don't know about you, but it sure sounds to me like Jesus cares about the least among us. And a society that does not care for the least among us is a broken society. We can build up, but if we're not taking care of those that are down, it's a faulty top. It'll eventually collapse. And we're building a society that built up, but we've got to take care of those that are at the bottom. But of course, there's a question that always comes up. I'd love to help people that are hurting, people that are broken, people that are weak, people that are homeless, people that are in poverty. But what if I get taken advantage of? What if I get taken advantage of? I'm glad you asked that question. Let's answer that right now. Ready? Verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad. And they promised to give him money, so he sought how he might conveniently betray him. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare that you may eat the Passover?" He sent out 2 of his disciples, and he said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, 'Where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?'" Verse 15, "He will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us." Verse 16, "So his disciples went out. They came into the city. They found it just as he had said, and they prepared the Passover. In the evening he came with the 12, and as they sat and ate, Jesus said, "I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me." And they began to be sorrowful, and they said to him one by one, "Lord, is it I?" And another said, "Is it I?" And he answered and he said, it is one of the 12 who dips with me in the dish. Verse 21, the Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had never been born. Words you never want to hear Jesus speak about you, right? It'd be better if he was never born. I wish I was a more generous person than I am. Meaning I'm not a very generous person. I want to be. But in our lifetime and in our ministry, we've had the opportunity to help those that need help. Should have done it more. I'll never regret taking those opportunities. But with that, I can answer the question, what if you get taken advantage of? Well, let me tell you this. You will get taken advantage of. Before you ask the question, what if? Let's just answer it now. Yes, you will. But giving extravagantly isn't about making sure that nothing bad ever happens in the process. It's just about the giving. It's just about the love. It's just about the offering. You see, here's the thing. I hate, and we've been taken advantage of. Joy and I have tried to help people, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it's failed. But what I can tell you is this. I don't look back with regret that we ever did what we did. I wish I would have done more. Why? Because my heart's free when we do that, when we help somebody else. I'm free. I'm not holding on to stuff or things or values. I'm giving it away and I'm saying, I'm going to love God the way I've been loved. But have we been taken advantage of? Oh boy, yeah. In some big ways. And you know the part that hurts me the most about getting taken advantage of? I didn't see it coming. And you know why it hurts the most? I feel like a sucker. That's why. I feel like an idiot, you know. Man, I should have seen that. And then I have to read what I just read to you. It's about Judas. Did Jesus get taken advantage of? Yes. He invited into his team of 12, and one of them was a total loser, a betrayer, thief. But here's the difference when Jesus got taken advantage of. Jesus was not taken advantage of because he knew what was coming. Think about that. Jesus knew what Judas was about to do. And he still let Judas on the team. Do you imagine how the disciples must have felt in those, right after it all happened? There they are, they're in the garden, and Judas comes up and kisses Jesus, and they're all of a sudden realizing Judas is the betrayer. You know how dumb they must have felt? I didn't see it coming. Jesus knew it the whole time. Listen, before you hold back from extravagance, just remember that Jesus was taken advantage of, and he let it happen. And I'm not suggesting to you, let's all be dumb and just go out there. What I am saying is this. Will you be taken advantage of when you choose to do good in the name of Jesus? The answer is yes. And is it worth it? Yes. It's worth it every single time. We'll always be better off for having an extravagant heart than a stingy one. You will always be better off having an extravagant heart than a stingy heart. Look at the next section here, verse 22. As they're eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." He took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said, "Even if all are made to stumble, I will not." And Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you that today, this night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter spoke more vehemently, "If I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said likewise. It's like this little game of everybody. I mean, how awkward. Earlier that night, when Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me, did you hear what they all said? Is it I? Is it I? Am I the one, Lord? You know we call that in Bible terms? Humility. It's a great quality. Well, a few hours later, they've sung a hymn and everything seems to be going great. And Jesus tells them, all of you are going to stumble because of me. One of you will betray me and the rest of you are going to abandon me. And now they're fighting over each other to get in front of each other. Even, Peter says, even if all these guys do that, Lord, I'll never do that. And of course, how did that make the rest of them feel? Peter, that was a jerky thing to say right there. John says, I'll never deny you, Lord. Peter will. Peter totally will. I'll never do that. James jumps in there and says, no, John, you're too weak. You're too emotional. You'll definitely abandon him. Bartholomew tried, and everybody said, we don't even know who you are. We don't even know. Nobody knows who you are. You're definitely going to abandon him. You understand? Everybody's fighting for their position now. Can you imagine if you knew someone you loved was going to die and you spent the remaining hours fighting over your own position? Your own pride? That the last things that you spoke about were about your pride? Heartbreaking. It would have been totally heartbreaking. And we'll look later on in the coming weeks, we'll look at their issue. But today we're focused on Jesus's. If you were the one that was dying and your family and friends spent all their time in their pride, it would be heartbreaking. What heartache it must have given Jesus to deal with that. When you've got friends like Jesus had, he didn't need his enemies, did he? His friends were doing enough heartache for him. I can't even imagine the amount of discouragement he must have been experiencing. And he says, you're all going to abandon me, but here's the beauty of it all. But I'll see you in Galilee. Okay, so it's like he gave them a script for what's going to happen. They couldn't believe it, and by not believing it, they fulfilled the script. You're all going to abandon me, but I'll see you in Galilee. I'll never abandon you. And then, cock-a-doodle-doo or whatever, Does the rooster say, the rooster says cock-a-doodle-doo, right, in English? What does he say in Spanish? What? Is that right? Ki? Okay, all right. In Hungarian, he says kukariku. You thought roosters only speak one language. You were wrong. Bilingual, trilingual, they got it. You're going to be betrayed. You're going to betray me. You're going to abandon me. It's going to happen. What heartache. Listen, this is what's happening to Jesus the night before he's going to a cross. Do you understand why John 13, verse 1 is an important verse? He loved them to the end. He could have dropped them off along the way easily, but he loved them to the end. One more section, verse 32. They came to a place which was named Gethsemane, and he said to the disciples, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed, and he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch. He went a little farther, and he fell on the ground, and he prayed, if it was possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. He came and he found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. Spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. Again he went away, and he prayed, and he spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to answer him. Verse 41, he came again the third time, and he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? It's enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. My betrayer is at hand. I don't know about you, but those are heartbreaking verses. Here, Mark highlights that Jesus did not want to die on a cross. And that is a significant part of the gospel story. What Jesus was about to experience was going to test the boundaries of human ability. Could he open not his mouth when being beaten senseless? Could he endure not only the physical elements of the cross, but the spiritual darkness of sin being poured upon his body? That at one moment he would take all of our sin upon himself. He knows what's coming, and he goes into the Garden of Gethsemane and he begins to pray. And we're told in another gospel that he's sweating blood. This is a panic attack, you could say. This is more anxiety than most people will ever experience in their lifetime. A total breakdown at this moment. And he asked a few of his friends to be there and to pray. But they couldn't do it. Why? Because their eyes were heavy. He asked one thing of them, and they weren't able to do it. And the moral of the story is not that he had terrible friends. The moral of the story is that he loved them to the end. They failed him several times in Mark chapter 14. They should have seen the extravagance of the oil. They should have seen that their pride was getting in the way of their relationship with Jesus. They should have understood that when Jesus needed them to pray, they shouldn't be asleep. But they missed it all. They missed all of it. You know, it's been said many, many times, and it's very true, that the victory of the cross happened in the Garden of Gethsemane. Because Jesus said, "Not my will, but yours be done." Once those words were spoken, everything that is about to happen is going to happen. But until that moment, please understand this. Until that moment, Jesus was looking for a way out. And I know that can be really hard for us when we think of God and Jesus and, wait, what? I thought he, get it out of your head. Mark wants us to see it really clear. Jesus wanted a way out, but there was no way out. He endured the cross. Do we deserve the love that we've been shown? No. Did the disciples deserve it? Not the way they were acting in Mark 14. Pretty discouraging when you got friends like that. But he loved them to the end. You see, the decisions they made that day did not define how he saw them. He loved them. He loved them to the end. He loved them, listen, he loved them to the end. And here's the big picture of it all. You ready? And this is so exciting. He will love you to your end. He loved them to the end. And I hate to tell you this, but this isn't the last time they're going to make a mess of stuff. It's going to happen more. It's going to happen once he's risen from the dead. It's going to happen once they're filled with the Holy Spirit. It's going to happen in their ministry. It's going to happen in their life. They're going to fail him. They're going to let him down. They're going to misrepresent him. They're going to be selfish when they should have been extravagant. They're going to be arrogant when they should have been humble. It's going to happen. It's going to happen to them, and it's going to happen to us too. So what do we do with that? How do I respond? When I look at Mark 14, I say, man, I would have dropped those guys off before I made it to the end. But Jesus doesn't do that. He loved them to the end, and he's going to love you to your end, whenever that is. One day, if you are in Jesus Christ, if you have put your faith in him, you will stand before him, and he is going to say to you, well done. And you're going to probably look back, and the Bible doesn't say this, but this is my guess. Well done. Well done. And you'll have a statement, question, conversation. He'll say a statement and you'll say a question. Well done. Well done. I feel well done. I feel cooked and baked and fried and well done. You did a great job. Great job. Look at my life. hit rewind just a couple days ago. How could you say well done? And Jesus will be able to say well done to you because he did well on the cross. He lived well so that you could hear a well done. We are in him. We're wrapped up in his life. And I read Mark 14 and my heart breaks for Jesus. No doubt his heart broke on that day. But he loves them as he loves you to the very end. Don't ever forget that. We want to leave here with an excitement that we are loved to the very end. Do we deserve it? Stop worrying about that part. You'll worry yourself into a fit. You'll never answer that question. But you're loved extravagantly. He loves you to the very end. Let's pray, and we're going to close in some worship. Thank you so much for watching us today here at Calvary San Diego. We're so glad you took the time to be with us in our service. We'd like to encourage you that if you would like to see more of our studies, you can do so at our website. And we also want to give you the opportunity there to give if it would be in your heart to do so. You can do that at our website, calvarysd.com/giving. We'd love for you to partner with what God's doing here in San Diego. God bless you guys.